Good morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulali. The headlines. Ukrainian President Zelensky says more realistic peace talks are now taking place with Russia as Ukrainian capital Kyiv continues to witness massive shelling. G7 leaders to meet virtually over Russia's invasion of Ukraine as U.S. Senate brands Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal. Plus, Russia prepares to default on dollar-denominated debts. Today is day 21 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says peace talks with Russia are beginning to, quote, sound more realistic, but time is still needed to reach a breakthrough. In his latest video address, he said victory over Russia would require the work of all Ukrainian citizens, including the negotiating team currently holding ongoing talks via Zoom. Russia has continued to press Ukraine to formally renounce any intention of ever joining NATO and formally recognize the breakaway provinces of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. In the meantime, the talks are due to continue later on today. On Tuesday, Mr. Zelensky appeared to concede that Ukraine would not join NATO. He says his country should accept that it may not become a member of the US-led NATO military alliance, a key Russian concern that it used to justify the invasion. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian capital continues to come under serious attack as shelling continues. Kyiv's emergency services now say that a 12-story residential building in the Shevchenko district was hit by Russian shelling around 6 a.m. A neighboring 9-story building was also damaged. Authorities say that 2 people were injured and 35 were evacuated from the building. The fire was put out at about 7:45 and rescuers are now searching for survivors. Residents across the city remain hunkered down in bunkers, underground shelters, and their homes amidst a 2-day curfew. Officials have warned that it is a difficult and dangerous moment for the capital. And Central Europe's leaders, that is leaders in Poland, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic, have been on a solidarity visit to Kyiv in a show of high-level backing for President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki told President Zelensky that the European Union will, quote, never leave Ukraine alone, after he, the Polish Deputy Prime Minister, and the Prime Ministers of the Czech Republic and Slovenia arrived there late yesterday. Mr. Morawiecki, Czech counterpart Peter Fiala, and Slovenia's Janez Janša, who all traveled by train, were the first foreign leaders to visit the capital since Russia's invasion last month. President Zelensky noted that many ambassadors had left Kyiv and thanked the visiting leaders for their support.
The European Union has to give very quickly a candidate status, and more than this, has to invite Ukraine to the European Union and all the defensive weapons to defend your homes. We will try to organize, orchestrate all over the world. We will never leave you alone. We will be with you because we know that you are fighting not only for your homes, for your freedom, for your security, but also for ours.
We are here because you're fighting also our fight. You're not only defending your homeland, you're not only defending the territory of the Ukraine and of the Europe, you're also defending something which we are calling fundamental European values. Freedom, democracy, the right of every person to choose their own life, and every country to be sovereign and to choose its own path.
You are fighting for your lives, for your families, for your country, for freedom. But we know you are fighting also for our lives and for our freedom. We know it. And probably the main goal of our visit, or main message of our mission, is to say you are not alone. Our countries stand with you, Europe stand with your country.
In the meantime, the group of 7 industrialized nations, popularly called the G7, will be holding an online meeting to discuss Russia's actions in Ukraine later on today. And that's according to Japanese Finance Minister Shunichi Suzuki, who made the comment in Parliament. However, he did not specify whether the meeting will be held among G7 financial leaders or other representatives. Japan says it will revoke Russia's most favored nation trade status as part of further sanctions against Moscow. The government is set to announce the move today, following similar moves by Western partners. Japan has already imposed sanctions on chips and high-tech equipment to Russia. And speaking of sanctions, Australia has imposed new sanctions on 33 Russian oligarchs and business people. The country had earlier imposed sanctions on Russian politicians, including Mr. Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, members of the Russian parliament, and oligarchs after the invasion of Ukraine. Defense Minister Peter Dutton this morning called Russian President Vladimir Putin a, quote, paranoid and utterly ruthless operator, adding that his invasion of Ukraine had been another, quote, miscalculation that may very well destroy the man himself. Speaking in Canberra, Mr. Dutton also called out China for failing to condemn Russia's behavior and raising concerns of Chinese increased presence in the Indo-Pacific region.
The events of 1989 to 1991, culminating in the humiliating collapse of a great Russian empire, have become Putin's lifelong obsession. He's never accepted the outcome of the Cold War. Indeed, he's best understood as an unreconstructed creature of the sword and shield of the Soviet Union, the KGB. From the Dresden desk to the Kremlin, he has been a paranoid and utterly ruthless operator. So his actions should come as no surprise. It's becoming clear that Putin's Ukrainian gamble has been a miscalculation that may very well destroy the man himself. He has, for one, very seriously underestimated the Ukrainian people. Ukrainians have been unyielding in their resolve to live independent, prosperous and free. Russia has published a long list of states which it considers unfriendly, and that includes Australia, and we should wear that as a badge of honour. But it's in the cyber realm that Putin is most likely to strike. The Kremlin has long sought to weaponise the internet as a means of conducting a form of asymmetric warfare in the post-Soviet era. And so we must expect nations like ours to become the target of escalating cyber attacks. The very worst cyber attacks can, of course, inflict society-wide damage with enduring ramifications.
The United States Senate has unanimously approved a resolution seeking the investigation of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his government for war crimes over the invasion of Ukraine. The resolution said the Senate strongly condemns the violence and war crimes against humanity being carried out by Russian military forces. The unanimous vote was also to condemn Mr. Putin as a war criminal. The rare cross-party vote called on the International Criminal Court at The Hague to probe Mr. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. The measure does not carry the force of law, but encourages international investigations of Mr. Putin, his Security Council, and military leaders. Let's talk now to security analyst David Otto, who joins us from London, the capital city of the United Kingdom. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thank you.
Let's unpack some of this. Quite a bit of moving parts in this situation right now. The G7 is about to meet. Volodymyr Zelensky is talking about more realistic peace talks. Yesterday, it appeared that he may now be considering giving Russia the guarantee that he will not be taking Ukraine into NATO. Do you see some breakthrough on the horizon here?
I think there should be some breakthrough. I mean, like many others, I am appalled by the fact that we are almost at the brink of a nuclear war on the basis of Ukraine joining NATO or not. And I think, this is where I think, we should have been before 3 weeks of this invasion. They should have been a discussion to either give these guarantees. Of course, the question is, is this going to impact on the sovereign right of Ukraine itself? But remember, Russia is not just asking for the fact that Ukraine should not join NATO. They are also asking for some kind of a demilitarization of Ukraine, but also what they term the denazification, which in effect is removing those leaders that are much more akin to lean towards NATO member states. So it will be challenging. I mean, as you know, in war, you can fight for one reason, but you never stop for the same reason.
Let's take the other side of what you mentioned here now, the military situation on the ground. There are those who argue that Russia miscalculated and that the Ukrainian defense has proved stronger and more resilient than was initially anticipated. There were others who said that this is a classic Russian strategy, which is to isolate and encircle targets whilst progressively starving them into submission of resources and all of that. On the ground, do you think that the situation is better now for a breakthrough, or is it worse side by side with what is going on, perhaps politically?
I think, from a military perspective, one has to be very clear. Ukraine is taking all the brunt of this war. Encouraging Ukrainian soldiers that this is going to be a winnable war is just a tactic of actually putting more pressure to the international community to sanction Russia. I think, the people that are losing here is the Ukrainians, and the NATO states have made it very clear that they will not put boots on ground directly, of course, and that the no-fly zone that Ukraine has been asking for is not going to happen, because, of course, the West, the NATO, the EU member states do not want a situation where there will be direct confrontation with Russian, military, and that, of course, is going to lead to an outbreak of a war between NATO member states and Russia. But if you look at the current military situation, of course, Russia will invade and do what it's doing, but it will be very challenging for Russia to occupy. And I don't think that is Russia's aim. Russia's aim is very simple. They do not want Ukraine to become a member of NATO, and that is the red line. And that is what is going to happen. Russia will not allow that to happen. So I think we're much more better off. The world is much more better off, much more safer, if there are these guarantees. And there must be some negotiation lines which should be agreed, not the current situation that we're facing.
Again, still talking militarily, and now the fact that all kinds of weapons are finding their way into Ukraine under military aid and through other methods. And from what we heard, particularly near the start of the invasion, the Ukrainians are basically handing this out to virtually anyone who shows up and says that he can fight or he's willing to fight. If indeed there is some kind of breakthrough, which we all hope it is, and that the suffering and all the destruction and damage going on can stop, there will still be this problem of how you get control over the armaments that have been given to private hands. Wouldn't there be that? And then there will also be the question of the possibility of this moving across borders into other places.
I mean, there's also another possibility. There's also a possibility that we would find people that are linked to terrorist groups, going to Ukraine to join, and then, of course, leave with these arms and become, very deadly. I mean, we saw the same thing in Afghanistan. I mean, it's repeating itself. When the former USSR was armed by the US CIA to fight against, they armed the Mujahideens, to fight against the former USSR. And then these weapons ended up in the hands of terrorist groups that became Al-Qaeda. And you know the ripple effect of that. So what we're seeing here, again, let's be very clear from the military perspective, Russia will overwhelmingly, launch its attacks on Ukraine. What you want to see, if you're Ukraine, is to see Ukraine returning the same kind of military attacks on Russia. But we haven't seen that. There has not been a single Ukraine launching an attack on Russian soil. So there is still an overwhelming firepower from Russia. The situation is just going to turn to an insurgency, and this is where most Russians will lose if they decide to occupy Ukraine. But again, I don't think Vladimir Putin wants to repeat that. There's been mention of war crimes by the U.S. Republican Senate Lindsey Graham. There's also been mention of the same by UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid. But again, as you know, Vladimir Putin and Russia is a big country, and I don't see the ICC getting its hands on Russia. But to be much more precise, it is also very controversial that this is coming from the US. The US did not ratify the Rome Treaty, the Rome Statute, and it is very shocking that the US is mentioning the ICC when, of course, it's been the same kind of scenario that people have mentioned against the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, the likes of NATO being attacking Libya. So quite double standards here, but this is not by no means justification for the attacks that have been launched by Russia on Ukraine.
This is one big international crisis situation, if you like, that for the first time has the United Kingdom, where you are outside of the EU. The UK is acting almost independently of the EU, although there continue to be contacts. You being resident in the UK there, you being in the UK at this point, what's the sentiment like? Do you think that it's possible that if NATO, which is meeting today, takes the lead, the United Kingdom, which is a member of NATO, may actually decide to work within the organizations that it has kind of distanced itself from for the purpose of putting a notch on its shoulder of victory in this situation?
I think what we'll see is that, yes, the UK not being a member of the EU after the Brexit, that is an economic position. There is a unanimity in terms of how the military coalition, so to speak, against Russia is. We've seen that just like the EU states, the UK is applying the same level of sanctions against Russia. We've seen that with the Chelsea Football Club and other rich Russian oligarchs that are based in the UK. So there is a high level of unanimity. They're speaking the same language. Remember, Russia is, like China, of course, is one of the biggest rivals to countries like NATO and the US from an economic or military perspective. So, yes, there is that high level of unanimity. I mean, the Brexit situation has been kept far away from this. These countries are working hand in gloves to ensure that they apply the same level of sanctions against Russia. And that is why the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has copied from the Republican Senate, Lindsey Graham, to say that the Russian president, will face the ICC. But I doubt, because of course, we've seen that the ICC is a two-legged bulldog when it comes to the European states or the Western states. It's much more very, very active when it comes to African states. But again, as I said, this is by no means a justification of the atrocities that, we've seen Russia launching. But, this is something that shouldn't happen in the first place.
Finally, before I let you go, I must ask, NATO, the G7 countries are meeting today. That isn't quite a military alliance. It is more of an economic alliance. Those 7 countries are the richest in the world. But NATO, on the other hand, has continued to meet all through this crisis. And I've read some reports where some analysts like yourself have suggested that Ukraine needs to come to the table to talk to Russia, but that NATO needs to then fortify all the other countries that are beyond Ukraine, that because if Russia gets its way in the case of Ukraine, it will then proceed to probably impose its will further afield. And it already indicated that it might do that with the warning that you and I discussed about 2 weeks ago that it issued to Finland and Denmark.
Yes, I mean, what you've got to understand is that, from an analytical perspective, I don't think Russia wants to get directly involved, with NATO forces. And I also don't think NATO wants to do that. I mean, NATO has made it crystal clear that they will not engage directly in the case of Ukraine. Now, they may be doing that indirectly, as you know. They will be sending weapons. They will be sending, resources of all sorts that is unimaginable to Ukraine. Russia understands this. I mean, Russia is a big player in this field, and they learn what NATO members are capable of doing, indirectly. They also understand what they are willing to do directly, and what NATO members are not willing to do directly is to have a confrontation with Russia. And the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, has made it also very clear that, listen, we will not be a member of NATO, because, of course, we are not being allowed to be a member of NATO. And, it's rather frustrating, I have to say, to Ukrainians who have been somehow pushed to the wall to play tough against Russia, forgetting to understand that, when it comes to military intervention, they will be left alone directly. So it's a very tough time, to live in. But these alliances that have been having these meetings, I think it will all be much more related to how do we support Ukraine indirectly, and how do we continue to apply economic sanctions? How do we, defend ourselves, against possible cyber attacks, disinformation? These are all various war typologies that are going on now. It's not just the military war, it's the economic warfare, the disinformation, the misinformation, the cyber attacks. And of course, this is going to take quite a long time. But I don't think Russia will fancy the insurgency part of this war, because this is where they will lose more. I hope we don't get to that point. I hope there's some kind of a negotiation, to end this war.
Indeed, we all share in that hope. David Otto, thank you so much for joining us from London this morning.
Thank you.
We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll give you details where the United States has announced $13.6 billion in additional humanitarian and military aid to the Ukraine. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Now, yesterday was day 20 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it appears Moscow's offensive is edging closer to central Kyiv, even as the two countries keep open a narrow diplomatic channel with more planned talks. Shortly before dawn, a series of Russian strikes hit a residential neighborhood, igniting a huge fire and a frantic rescue effort in a 15-story apartment building.
Kyiv awoke to the sound of air raid sirens for a second day as two powerful explosions rocked the Ukrainian capital before dawn. Officials say at least 4 people have been killed after a strike hit a residential building in the city. The mayor has announced a 35-hour curfew.
We will defend our city. It's our homes. We never think to leave. It's our homes. We defend our children, family, our buildings, our city, and our future of Ukraine.
The city has been spared the worst of the fighting so far, but the Russian military is slowly closing in on the city, and shelling has intensified. Ukraine plans to evacuate civilians and deliver humanitarian aid to those trapped by Russian forces through 9 humanitarian corridors today. This includes to the besieged city of Mariupol, which has been under constant bombardment, leaving hundreds of thousands of residents sheltering without water or power for almost a week. According to the United Nations, more than 3 million people have now fled Ukraine since Russia invaded on February 24. Meanwhile, negotiations between Russia and Ukraine continue today. Ukrainian President Zelensky published another video message overnight where he sounded a note of cautious optimism about the talks. And speaking at a meeting of Joint Expeditionary Force leaders, the Ukrainian president says Europe must protect its own security by helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia, urging them to send more weapons.
So we all are the targets of Russia, and everything will go against Europe if Ukraine won't stand. So I would like to ask you to help yourself by helping us. You know the kind of weapon we need, everyone knows. You know what kind of defense measures we need. You know what that our need is, the fighter jets, and without your support it would be very difficult. And we want you to help us, and I do hope that you will be able to enhance that scope, and you will see how this will protect your security, your safety, and how that will make a stable peace not only for us but for your country.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is hosting the summit of Nordic and Baltic leaders to discuss European defence and security.
Nobody wants to be engaged in a direct military confrontation between the West and Russia. Clearly that's not something that any of us want to see. But we recognize that it is our duty to support the Ukrainian people in their hour of need, and particularly to support the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. I think already it is clear that Putin has gravely miscalculated. He's underestimated the heroism and determination of the Ukrainians to resist under President Zelensky. I think he's also gravely underestimated the unity of the West, which is expressed not least in this meeting today.
In the meantime, the EU has unveiled its fourth set of sanctions against Russia, aimed at crippling its ability to finance the invasion.
That's the strongest package of sanctions ever adopted by the European Union in its history. That's a historical decision. You will have more than 600 Russian people targeted. I don't want to give any name, but you will have more than 600 Russian people being targeted by those sanctions. You will have a large part of the financial system being targeted by those sanctions. You will have a new ban on some exportation like the luxury goods. And we will withdraw to the Russian state the most favored nation clause within the World Trade Organization, which will allow us, all the 27 member states, to increase the level of trade tariffs on all Russian goods. On all Russian goods.
A further 370 Russian individuals and entities have been hit by UK sanctions that include asset freezes and travel bans. This list includes former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. The UK has also hit Russia with trade restrictions, including an additional 35% tariff on vodka.
Let's go to Ukraine itself, where we are being joined, I hope, by Victor Akiyemi, who is a Nigerian student in Kherson, which is a city which many of our viewers are familiar with. Good morning, Victor. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
Okay, what is the situation there as at today? Because I know that Kherson and Sumy were two areas where Nigerians were kind of stuck. Is that still the situation today?
At the moment, I can't specifically talk for Sumy. I'm in Kherson. And at the moment, as we speak, we are still having all the students of Kherson State Maritime Academy stuck at the moment. Where are
the students staying? Where are they? Are they still staying within the school facilities, or you are in a bunker, an underground shelter? Where exactly are you?
Presently, I would not like to review where the students stay specifically, but most of them stay in the school facility at the moment.
Well, I asked the question not to reveal your location, but because we were concerned about your safety. That was why I was asking, because I understand that Kherson is one of the cities that is also under attack.
Yes, yes.
In fact, yesterday there was the report that while you were being contacted for this interview this morning, you told our program producer that at that point in time you were under attack.
Yes, in the evening yesterday, there was sand in some areas. We could hear blast in some areas of the city. We are not really sure. We later heard this morning that it's from the airport area, but specifically, I've not been there myself to confirm it, but we heard that it's from the airport region. And reading from the news again this morning, we heard it's from the airport region. But I can't confirm that specifically. That's just what I can say.
Now let's go on to how you get out of there. What's the situation with a possible evacuation? Have you heard from any of the authorities about how you are going to leave Kherson for a safer location?
Yeah, at the moment we've been contacting so many organizations. There is no possible way out yet, but the only thing is that we still want to appeal more to the Nigerian government and all other government having their citizens here. We want to appeal to every one of them to do their best, because this evacuation can only take place with the assistance of the government. We cannot do this ourselves, because the area is seriously is not an area whereby we can just go out ourselves. It's tense at the moment, and we don't know what might likely happen. So we want to just appeal to the government to see a way they could help us out.
When you talked about being in touch with various organizations or having them get in touch with you, the Nigerian embassy or embassy officials in the Ukraine, have they been in touch with you at all? Or who exactly is it that you are asking to step into the matter, and what exactly do you want them to do now? Because I know that frustration must be about setting in now. I know that one or two of your colleagues who we spoke to yesterday had said, look, we're tired of appealing. They should please just come and do what they need to do to get us out of here.
Yeah, for example, we spoke with the diaspora relief. We spoke with the diaspora relief, and they told us to hold on so that they could get a safe passage for us to come out. And we also spoke with the Black Women for Africa. I think I can remember those two people specifically. We spoke with them, and they've been trying their best. They made some supply of food to people while they told us to wait for safe evacuation. Because, as it is, it needs to be properly planned. It's not just the situation of evacuating, but to be properly planned so that it's been really safe. So we are waiting for them, the Diaspora Relief, Black Women for Africa, and some other organizations. We've spoken with a lot of people. Yesterday, I spoke with the chairman of Diaspora Relief, Ijeoma, and she told me that they are seriously working on it. That's what I can say.
This Diaspora Relief, it appears as if some of its officials are Nigerians.
Yes, that's correct. Most of his officials, not some, most of his officials are Nigerians.
Okay, now finally, before I let you go, I want to ask, you mentioned that some of these organizations have provided some level of relief in terms of food supplies and so on. But how are you guys keeping up with medication, ensuring that you have warm clothing, and then, of course, the perennial issue of heat, ensuring that none of you suffers from hypothermia or the extremities of the weather?
Well, in this situation, we are just managing what we could do. Like some of the people staying in apartment complaining that there is no water, there is no gas. In this situation, there's nothing we could do. We are just trying our best to manage the situation. Like, for example, in my area, we don't have water. We just try to call on the organization, the Diaspora Relief, they sent some bottles of water to us, and we've been managing the water. Just the situation is just we are managing what we have. Some people, it differs by area. Some areas they are not having gas. Some area they have gas and water. So they've been sending and they've been trying their possible best to at least assist us till the evacuation is possible. But we just want to appeal that it should be as possible. It should be as fast as possible, because the situation is not getting it's getting more tense. So we just want to appeal they should try and make it fast as possible.
Indeed, we join you in that call that they should make it as fast as possible, and I'm sure some of those in charge and some of those who can make this happen are listening. Now, Victor Akinyemi, please stay safe. Stay out of harm's way until this happens. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Russia today faces its first payment on US dollar bonds since it invaded Ukraine last month. The country's economy is in dire straits, however, even as Moscow is due to pay $117 million in interest on $2-denominated sovereign bonds or risk defaulting on its debt. Russian President Vladimir Putin had said that Moscow would make the payment, but in rubles, as long as the sanctions don't allow dollar settlements. Paying in local currency rather than dollars could set off a significant wave of defaults. Russia's attack on Ukraine has sparked international condemnation in major financial capitals. The United States, the European Union, and allies have imposed severe sanctions on Moscow. The penalties froze more than half of the central bank's $300 billion in assets and sent the ruble spiraling 35% against the US dollar. Well, we had discussed this before now, and so I'm being joined now by Ini John Mekwa, business correspondent. Ini, so the day has arrived,
yes,
and it does look like what we talked about is about to happen.
Yes, it does look like. Let's just take a little bit of step backward and see what this is about. So this bond is... it's like the country, Russia, raised money in the international scene. So what they did was to get investors to buy, their sovereign bonds and say, okay, we are investing in Russia over this period of time. We have been promised that we're going to get this percentage of returns, So that is the background of it. That's to help us understand the implication of this, because what it means at this point is the investors who bought this bond have already lost some money, because already, the ruble is down, right. The economy is down. It's not, they are not making the percentage they were promised in the first place. Now, if they don't even get this, what it means is that maybe they are going to lose their money. That's on the short term. On the long term, however, if Russia wakes up tomorrow and says, we're going to the international scene again, we want to raise some money, most likely they will not have investors. So that is what it implies when you have Fitch and other ratings saying that, maybe their bonds or their economy, their credit rating is junk, so because investors do not have confidence, enough to invest. Nigeria does this a lot. We have a lot of bonds and everything. This is how we raise money. So that is the implication of this. So they might default, but they have a 30-day grace if a miracle happens before then, because analysts have already said that even if the war ends today, the sanctions are lifted, which doesn't look, very likely, they will still feel the impact for a long time, before they can recover and get to where they were before it happened. Exactly.
Now, the markets in China are reacting to U.S. threats that anyone who helps Russia, because, that feeds into this.
Exactly.
That if, for example, China were to say, okay, well, this $117 million, we'll help you pay it, and then you can pay us back when things settle.
Yeah.
They're going to come under sanctions.
In fact, they had a major threat yesterday, because yesterday, Hang Seng, which is the market for Hong Kong, it sank to a 6-year low. Just by reaction of all of this, the association with Russia and the possibility or not of them helping Russia, their market sank. But this morning it's coming up because they say the US and China are in talks about, what to do about it. So I think China is being wise here to say, yes, we are friends and we do have a common enemy. you know, because of course China wants to take over the world and be the first in the world and everything. But I mean, let's also be wise about it. But there's also another development in that, and that's in the area of chip. Now, the US and European Union are doing something about that, because even before now, because of COVID, there was shortage of chip, you know, all those parts that they use for computer and all that. There was shortage of it. Russia is a major producer of it also. So, of course, this has also brought it down. So the world was turning, or at least the US and Europe were turning to China. But they are learning that we need to, just in case China decides to follow up with their friends.
Other options
exactly.
Again.
So they have already started Intel Corporation. They already have, I think, $18.8 billion expansion on that, so that they can start producing more chips. Not that they were not producing, they can start producing more chips, and then Europe seems really determined to rid themselves of Russia and all those. So a lot of developments coming up from there.
While you were talking about the whole idea behind chips and expanding the production, oil is also, they're also trying to expand the production of oil, because many of these countries also are in the production process.
Exactly. In fact, as we speak, the UK Prime Minister is in UAE, going to Saudi Arabia, and these are countries that, you know, the US and the West were not so comfortable with. But at this point, it seems that is the next option to fill up the gap that Russia has left, especially for Europe. Even US, they do feel it. I spoke to a friend who is in the United States yesterday, and she said the pump price has reflected in food. They're finding it really difficult to buy food and all those extra things. Of course, energy. Yesterday, finance ministers in EU met, you know, to find a way to at least help and shield the consumers a little bit. So, I mean, it's really going on, and they are looking for how to boost supply. But unfortunately for Nigeria, according to the OPEC monthly oil reports, which just came out yesterday for last month, our output actually dropped by 10%.
When we're supposed to be producing more.
And guess what? It's going to be worse, because just like 2 days ago, a couple of days ago, two major oil giants declared force majeure. That means our production is going to be less 170,000 barrels per day, again, by the end of this month. So
call it double jeopardy. There is no doubt about the fact that this is taking a very... well, finally, before I let you go, I also need to talk about the issue that we raised the last time. Now, what happens if Russia defaults?
Yeah, so if Russia defaults, that's the picture I was trying to paint. If Russia defaults, so their rating goes down more, worse than it is. I don't know what's less than junk, and Fitch rating, all of them would. So next time, the first investors will lose their money. Unfortunately, the investors...
They can't seize any of Russia's assets outside to make it...
Well, not at this stage. There's nothing like that says they can do that at this stage. You know, the only thing is investors will lose their finances, their investment and their profits, and then they lose their credibility, you know, which means that if they have other requests, loans, debts, you know, it's more difficult for them to raise money. And people, I mean, I don't think you would want to put your money when you know that...
Where my shirt was removed the last time.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the immediate consequences of them defaulting. And then, of course, in future, you know, the West, they will certainly think of some ways.
Long memories. Very long memories. Thank you very much, Ini.
Thank you.
Of course, details of this, as always, Ini will be here at 1:30 on Business Incorporated. Ladi Williams will be here just after this show at 10 o'clock with Business Morning and details of all these stories. And the immediate and medium, long-term reactions to them will feature on those programs. Thank you once again for joining us.
For having me.
It's time for a break, and when we'll return, we'll be on the last stretch of our show this morning. Please stay on with us. Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says that his country has suffered more than $500 billion in damages since the invasion began, and insists that Russia pays for the restoration of Ukraine after the war. Mr. Shmyhal did not go into how exactly reparations could even be collected, even if Ukraine did win the war, but mentioned seizing Russian property abroad. He added that Ukraine would also seek financial assistance from allies. The Prime Minister made the comments at yesterday's meeting with leaders of three neighboring nations, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovenia, who had traveled to Kyiv in solidarity. In the United States, President Joe Biden has signed an annual spending bill that contains $13.6 billion in humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. The president had announced that he had signed the bipartisan government funding bill into law, keeping the government open and providing a historic $13.6 billion in funding for the embattled country.
Putin's aggression against Ukraine has united people all across America, united our two parties in Congress, and united freedom-loving world. And it's an act with urgency and resolve that we're doing right now that you've provided me the ability to do. I want to thank the congressional leadership for working so quickly to make sure we have the resources we need, economic, humanitarian, and security, to continue our forceful response to this crisis. We've already committed more than $1.2 billion in security assistance to the people of Ukraine just over the past year. And I know all of you know that. It's preaching to the choir here. But we've been providing anti-armor, taking out tanks, anti-air capabilities directly to the Ukrainian forces. And we're also facilitating significant shipments of security assistance from our allied partners to Ukraine.
Russia says it has put United States President Joe Biden, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and a dozen top U.S. officials on a stop list that bars them from entering the country. Alongside Mr. Biden, U.S. officials on the list included Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, CIA Chief William Burns, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The ban is in response to sanctions imposed by Washington on Russian officials amidst Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Foreign Ministry had added Mr. Trudeau to the list of sanctioned individuals later. The measures appear to be mainly symbolic, as the Foreign Ministry said it was maintaining official relations and, if necessary, would make sure that high-level contacts with the people on the list could still take place. The UN Development Program, UNDP, says 9 of 10 Ukrainians could be plunged into poverty if the war drags on over the next year, wiping out 2 decades of economic gains. Achim Steiner, UNDP administrator, says that his agency is working with the Kyiv government to avoid a worst-case scenario on the economy and hope to provide cash transfers to families to buy food and other basics to keep them from fleeing.
We are presenting a number of scenarios because if the conflict is a protracted one, if it were to continue, we are going to see poverty rates escalate very significantly. Before the conflict, roughly the estimate was about 2% of the Ukrainian population living below the poverty rate. That's about $5.50 a day. With different scenarios in the report, we present numbers that are really extremely worrying. The number of people who could fall below the poverty line could reach 28%, and if the war were to continue, indeed, up to 90% of people could be at risk of falling into poverty or fall below the poverty line. Extreme end of the scenario is an implosion of the economy as a whole, and that could ultimately lead to up to 90% of people either being below the poverty line or being at high risk of, which is defined in international terminology and statistics that we use at a range of between $5.50 and $13. So the consequences clearly are already visible right now. For instance, roughly up to 50% of businesses in the Ukraine have already ceased operating to all intents and purposes. The other 50% are to some extent able to operate. That alone gives you a sense of how fundamental the impact is on the economy of Ukraine just to these first 3 weeks of the conflict. But we're also looking at programs that we have tried and tested before in other conflict situations in the United Nations. Cash transfer programs, particularly in a country such as Ukraine, where the financial system and architecture is still functional, where ATMs are available. A critical way in which to reach people quickly is with cash transfers or a temporary basic income. And our report also suggests that there are very immediate ways in which that kind of support can be deployed in order to help people cope with the immediacy of the crisis. So cash transfers become a top priority.
A former member of the International Olympic Committee, Adams Pengeli, has urged the organization to be tougher on Russia and ban the country's Olympic Committee and its administrators and not just recommend sanctions. The former Olympic skeleton racer was the only member to vote against an IOC decision on Russia over the country's doping scandals. In 2016, Pengeli had called for a blanket ban on Russia at the Rio de Janeiro Olympics over its doping scandal after the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport has upheld a ban imposed on Russian teams appearing in UEFA competitions following the invasion of Ukraine. The decision means Spartak Moscow are banned from the Europa League and Russia's women's team are banned from Euro 2022 in England this summer. The sport's apex court said it was likely to make a decision at the end of the week on the Football Union of Russia's bid to overturn FIFA's decision to throw Russia out of the playoffs for the 2022 World Cup. And Chelsea manager Thomas Tuchel says the Blues are dealing with British government restrictions on their operations in a professional manner and will do whatever it takes to advance in their Champions League last 16 second leg tie at Lille. Chelsea's Russian owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the government, while the Premier League has also disqualified him as a director. Under the terms of a license issued by the government, Chelsea's operations are limited in scope. Tuchel added that he did not have a choice in being the voice of the club in a tumultuous two-week period and said he would continue to face questions about any new owner. We end with this video obtained showing a violinist playing a patriotic Ukrainian song in what appears to be a fire station. The video was shot on Monday in the western city of Ternopil, southeast of Lviv. Standing next to a fire engine, the violinist plays the 1914 patriotic march, O the Red Viburnum, in the middle. Keeping hope alive in very grim times. And that's how we end our show this morning. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock with Amarachi Ubani and Millicent Walker, and the show will be back tomorrow at 9 in the morning. To go out there and have yourselves a pleasant day, I'm Ladi Akiri Duluali.